Okay, so it's just a couple minutes after 8, so we'll go ahead, 8 my time. I don't know what it is where you are, so we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Stephanie Hagstrom, and I'm the Director of Community Development at the Research Data Alliance US, and I'll be the host for today's webinar. Before we get started, of course, I have a bit of housekeeping to share with you, and then we will turn it over to Jennifer for the presentation today. So a little bit about RDA Global and our region. The Research Data Alliance is a community of over 12,000 data experts from 145 countries, actually 46 countries now around the globe, who collaborate in building social and technical bridges to enable open sharing and the reuse of data. Members of the RDA come together through self-formed focused working groups and exploratory interest groups to exchange knowledge and discoveries. They discuss barriers and potential solutions. They define policies, and they also test standards. Many of the 97 active groups have produced outputs to enhance and facilitate global data sharing and reuse. The RDA also has 26 national groups, and these groups support initiatives of the members of those regions. And they also provide a platform for those regions to interact on a global level. There's 4 regional groups of the RDA that provide resources to support and sustain the RDA global operations. The RDA US, where I work and who's hosting this webinar, is one of those recognized regions, and we represent 2,500 plus members who also help strengthen the data science infrastructure community. So let me get the housekeeping. So a little bit of housekeeping. We are recording this session, and I will be adding the link to the recording on the RDA webinar webpage. We have allotted time at the end of the webinar for questions. There are 3 ways for you to interact with the presenter. If you'd like to speak, you're more than welcome to raise your hand, and I will unmute you so you can ask questions and have direct communication. Or you can add your question to the Q&A section of your Zoom panel, and I will repeat those questions to Jennifer. And the last is chat, and that's my least favorite because I have to copy those over. So if you could use the Q&A, I'd appreciate it. But I will grab the ones in the chat as well. So today's webinar is how to get attention for research project outputs. And this is part of our webinar series that we've been doing all through 2021 on group outputs, RDA group outputs and recommendations, and supporting the groups. And this is our last webinar for 2021. So Jennifer will be taking us out, and they will be developing some new webinar series for 2022. So it's now my pleasure to introduce our presenter today, Jennifer Gibson. Jennifer resides in the United Kingdom and is an open research advocate with experience engaging faculty, funders, libraries, administrators, and others in new research practices. She recently, as of last week, joined Dryad, the nonprofit community-based open data curation and publishing platform, as their executive director. Prior to joining Dryad, Jennifer was head of the open research communication and founding head of marketing communication at eLife. And eLife is an open access journal for the biomedical and life sciences. And she was also, prior to that, director of programs and operations for SPARC. And SPARC is the Scholarly Publishing and Academic Resources Coalition. She also serves as chair of the Open Access Scholarly Publishing Association, OASPA. I don't know if they say OSPA. And with that, I will turn it over to Jennifer. And I'll stop sharing.
Okay. Thanks so much, Stephanie. I will share my slides in just a second. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for inviting me and to the RDA community for supporting this series. It's just a pleasure to be here, and it works out really, really well since I'm just joining Dryad now. So I'm really looking forward to working with everyone. This webinar is actually the derivative of a 2-week course that I taught at the Force 11 Scholarly Communication Institute this past summer. So I'm so pleased to have the chance to share some of those components again, and we'll be curious to know what you all find most interesting and what we might need to build out at future events. So I think it's worth saying that while I'm not working in marketing exclusively anymore, this topic, what we're going to talk about today, continues to inspire and motivate me. So before we dig into the materials, I want to say just a little bit more about why that is. So I became interested in marketing as an undergraduate when I was at the University of Victoria in Canada. And I really wanted to understand how people can be moved, how we can be moved to build cathedrals and go on crusades. My undergraduate was actually in medieval studies, but also to how people can be moved to buy things that we don't really need or to get hooked on things that really aren't good for us. But I wasn't that interested in getting into commercial or consumer marketing at the time. So I took up an internship at the Canadian National Health Agency, Health Canada, where I learned from one of the pioneers about social marketing. So social marketing is really awesome. So it's literally, you know, taking the principles of commercial marketing, all of, you know, the decades of work and diligence in practice in moving people for, you know, consumer purposes to affect social change, for public good. So at this particular unit at Health Canada, they were using social marketing and they were winning awards to promote changes in behavior with respect to public health. So very much like what we've seen with COVID over the last year or so, and messages like hands, face, space here in the UK, there are people busily adapting the principles of commercial marketing to affect social change. So when I landed at Spark in about 2005, and at the time Spark was working to change researcher behavior with respect to choosing open access journals, to make data openly available for authors to retain their copyrights, and to get authors to deposit to repositories. So with all of that work ongoing, it really struck me that what we were doing was social marketing. But at the time, I didn't take it any farther. I didn't have enough experience, I suppose. So then at eLife, my story is going to end in just a moment, I promise. But at eLife, as head of marketing and community and related things for about 8 years, I always felt that we were doing things a little bit differently. So, you know, so in publishing in particular, a lot of the marketing talent comes from selling subscriptions. There's a heavy sales focus there, and that's a lot of what our marketing energy has gone into over the past. And I have some of that experience as well. And it just wasn't that useful. We really needed to be doing something different. And so I found myself going back to that basic marketing principle about understanding your audience, really knowing where they come from, which is what we're going to talk about today. So just last year, I began to make the case that what we're doing to change researcher behavior and to advance open research, what we're doing at, you know, Dryad and eLife and all of you here, what we're doing requires social marketing. So I called up some of the current experts to check, and they agreed. So that's what's brought me to today's presentation. So I hope that you're still here. I hope that you haven't hung up when I started talking about marketing, because this is really useful stuff. We could talk about outreach instead, and I've tried to use outreach in place of marketing in some places because our community has an aversion to some of these terms. But I hope that, but through my slides, you'll see what aspects are useful from marketing to take to our space. So So the first expert that I called up earlier this year to kind of check my head was John Drummond. So John Drummond is the founder and chairman of a unit called Corporate Culture. So they're using social marketing to advance change in different ways within corporations, but for the benefit of people and their well-being. And what John reminded me of is that the difference between conventional marketing and social marketing is that social marketing is about impact. We're trying to have an impact and a positive impact on society. So here's a diagram I think that many of you are familiar with. So I didn't hesitate to put it in front of you. But what I want to highlight here is the researcher journey. So the circle, from the outside of the circle, you see the process of assessment and discovery, analysis, writing, publication, and outreach. So this is the research communication journey. And inside there are the tools. I'm not going to talk about it now, but I think it's just a really cool chart from Bianca Kramer and Jeroen Bozeman. So social marketing starts with the journey of the user or the audience or the customer that you have in mind. So we're gathered here today to talk about how the RDA working groups in the main can help make the most of their output. So you've done all of this work together, and you've created objects, products that you then want to take to stakeholders in research. So they may be administrators, they may be faculty, they may be librarians, they may be infrastructure builders, any of these stakeholders, publishers. So we want to talk about how to take those objects to those audiences and help them to use them. So the first step of social marketing is thinking about what is the journey of that person? What is the workflow that you want to intervene in? So I'm using the researcher as our primary focus here. So the next step is then to look for opportunities to intervene. So where are there points where the researcher is doing something that we'd like them to not do? And where are they doing something that we want them to do? So how do we encourage them? So looking for moments to assert what we'd like them to do. And then we look for strategies to intervene in the journey. So what are we going to do? So we decide that between the analysis and the writing, we'd like them to make their data openly available. So what are our strategies for asserting at that point that they do that before they move on through the process? So Brian Nosek has provided a very handy framework for, I think, defining some of the interventions that we use and that are effective in changing researcher behavior. So this is probably very familiar to you as well, but he's talked about the systems that we build to make things possible. Software, I won't keep using data, but to make software available, we want to have repositories that are safe and secure and appropriate, and are structured to receive software in the right way. So systems, right? And then the user experience helps to make things easy, and then creating communities around these practices, make it normative, etc. So these are exactly the types of interventions that social marketing calls for us to apply in order to affect behavior change. And I would argue that an essential component of any of those interventions is communicating. So, when a tree falls in a forest, does anybody hear? So we've got a fantastic repository, but how do we communicate to the right people that they should begin to deposit their research objects in that database? So I've said, so we're here to talk about how to increase the impact of your work. So we started with the chairs of the RDA working groups, but we've extended the invitation to everyone because we hope that some of these strategies will be useful for anyone who's trying to gain attention in the research community. So we want to increase impact by getting attention from the right stakeholders. So Stephanie and I went back over the word stakeholder a couple times because we do want people to adopt the outcomes from your projects, but they're stakeholders until they adopt. And stakeholders, again, and what I'm thinking are the librarians, the administration, the faculty, the students, everyone in the kind of research microcosm. So please extrapolate on what I've just said. So in order to do that, so what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about our strategies. We're going to talk about knowing your audience, so how to begin to do that. how to reach them, how to begin to do that, and then look at that in the context of a bigger outreach plan. So again, I've kind of supplanted the word marketing with the word outreach, just so it's not to give you an adverse reaction. It's the same thing, right? So a bigger outreach plan encompasses a lot more than we're going to have the chance to talk about today, unfortunately. So it would start with your goal. You know, your goal may be to populate a digital repository. It may be to get buy-in for software deposit. It could be a lot of things. So starting with the goal. Then we want to begin to understand your audience. That will be our focus today. Then you would set the goals for your outreach program, and then select the tactics to achieve it. And then you would build some materials, your collateral and websites. Then you would set your plan, and you'd measure and optimize your plan to make sure that you get there. So we're not going to cover all of that, but we are going to really hone in on the topic of knowing your audience, because the people who taught me this stuff have emphasized that this is just the most important part. So again, I picked this up from the social marketing experts at Health Canada, and my mentor there said, you know, there are three keys to marketing or outreach, and they are segmentation, targeting, and positioning. I'm going to take each of those three in turn. So, you know, this material did come off the back of a course, so it does feel a little teachy. I hope that you'll still, you know, take some good stuff from it. But I did make a little worksheet in case you want to take it farther ahead. And of course, I've got my slides available as well. So I'll drop the link to Zenodo into the chat once I'm done. So segmentation is a process through which we define segments of our audience. So we've got our whole audience, the whole world of people, of stakeholders that we could be talking to, and we're looking for groups within that universe that are similar. So there are people to whom we can speak, and they will kind of hear us in the same way. There are people that we can count, so they're measurable. We know how many there are. That just helps to measure the effectiveness of what we're doing, and they're accessible. So as one more or less homogeneous group, we can get to them as one group. So that's what defines a segment. And so a segment further breaks your audience down into appropriate characteristics. So in our space, we might distinguish publishers from librarians, so sector, or speak to infrastructure developers separately. Oh, that's a bad example there, isn't it? Because publishers and libraries are both building infrastructure, but you know, distinguishing faculty from publishers, etc. So that's kind of a sector differentiation. Career stage in speaking to faculty can be an important distinction: geography, academic discipline, or behavior. So behavior is an interesting one. It's new to me, actually. On a course a few years ago, they were talking about targeting people based on what time of day they were going to watch TV. So that's really new. But as you might imagine, it's born of all of the data we have available on people habits these days. So I haven't used it, so I can't really speak to it in detail. But I imagine that at this stage, if you wanted to target people who use Twitter in the morning before they go to work in California, that is very likely possible at this stage. That's not something that I've used, but something that I have used, and I think is interesting, is adoption. So I think a person's behavior can very much be informed by their relationship with the topic that we have on hand for them. So if we want someone to engage with open research, there are going to be people who are more inclined, and there are people who are going to be less inclined, right? So this curve may also be familiar to you. It's the product adoption curve. It's textbook. I just took that one off the internet because it's everywhere. It's a very established thing. And so the product adoption curve, on the far left, you've got the people who are innovators, and they're willing to take on something new and maybe take risk. And then you have the early adopters, the ones who are, you know, willing to take it on once they know about it, and so on. So, you know, I find it useful to think about the communities that are going to be more and less receptive to messages about openness, open access, just as one example, open access to research. because there will be communities that are where the open access is established, and there will be communities where it's still a bit of a discussion to have. So that could be a useful framework to take forward with respect to segmenting your audience. Some of the things to think about with respect to breaking down your audience are that, how values and perspectives and priorities may vary. So I propose, based on my experience in the community, that these things vary across discipline. So, humanities and social sciences have very different views compared to lab sciences. Also, ecology has very different views to neuroscience. It's based on the dynamics of the discipline, right? Geographies will have different values, perspectives, and priorities born of their location and career stages similarly. So we can find very different views on key topics between early stage and late stage researchers. I do have a couple of examples. I'll try and whiz through them and not take too much time. We should have about 10 or more minutes at the end for questions. So just by way of example, to try and bring this home, I'm going to use eLife and the Force 11 meeting a few years ago as example. So eLife in 2012. So as Steph said, eLife is a journal for biology and medicine that we just started off in 2012. And the job was to go get papers, go get papers. And so we chose to distinguish or differentiate our audience based on discipline. So we worked across 15 different areas of science at the time, and also to differentiate based on, proximity, which is something that I'll define for you in just a moment. I made it up. Then the other mini case study I'll try and mention is the Force 11 meeting 2018 in Montreal. So the job of the communications volunteer committee was to get people to sign up, get people to come. So I want to credit Paul Tabner and Nate Jacobs and Martin Sugden here, because it was a huge team effort. I think it was quite successful, actually. So we segmented based on geography. So we separated people according to country and region, and then we segmented them according to their involvement in research. So those are the broad characteristics which we thought were important to use to distinguish subsets of our audience. So for Force 11, we wanted people who were engaged with open research and not people that weren't. And we wanted people who were in Eastern Canada as a priority for marketing, and not people that weren't. This was the message for the marketing group. So segmentation is the first step in developing a program, your outreach program, that has impact, because it helps you to deliver messages to the right audiences, the powerful messages, the right messages to the right audiences. So if you break up your world and then do the next step, then you're able to connect a powerful message with the audience that's ready to hear it, because you've done the work to figure out how that connection can be made. So if you wanted to take this home and work on it, the first thing I would ask you to begin to think about is, what segments define your audience? The next step is targeting. So it's just that. Targeting means choosing the segments that you're going to prioritize. So as I've just said, your message is going to be more powerful if it speaks to the interests of that specific audience, and the interests are different from audience to audience. So neuroscience is one of my favorite reference points, because they were so hard on us. So when the neuroscientists came to the homepage of the eLife journal, they were very clear to say, we don't see any neuroscience here. They want to see something that speaks to them, that resonates with them, and I think that's fair enough, and I won't forget that lesson. And targeting is also about selecting segments that have the most potential to help you to achieve. Selecting key segments has the power to help you to achieve your goal more effectively. So I think I speak to this a little bit later, but you can choose segments that are going to help you get the ball down the field a little bit more quickly. So I think that's here. So impact. So you've got your world. You've got all of these audiences. You've got your students. You've got your your faculty, and you've got your ecologists and your neuroscientists. So what do you do? Who do you prioritize? So you could think about which ones have the most size. So is it size? Do you want to work with the neuroscience community because they're one of the biggest? Will that help you to get to your goal faster? Or do you really want to work with the Nobel Prize winners because they have the influence that you need to get the community to buy into a brand new idea and then have their influence trickle down? So something to think about. Another consideration, of course, is how much money have you got? How many resources have you got to take this on? So, what audiences are closest to you, and how much effort does it take from you to reach into new places? So, examples again from me. With eLife, again, we differentiated based on subject, but it was probably quite straightforward for a biology journal, but we decided to prioritize stem cell biology, and neuroscience. And the reason we selected those was because our founding editors had prominent positions with each of those societies. So we were using their influence. And another priority we made, again, was this proximity thing. So I made it up, but it was, eLife was established in relation to H.H. Mai and Max Planck and the Wellcome Trust. It was a brand new project that nobody knew about. So it makes sense to just kind of build out from those organizations and work with communities that had proximity to them. With the Force 11 meeting, I said that geography was how we segmented, and that was kind of handed to us from the board because they wanted colleagues in Montreal to really lean in. They were confident about everyone else knowing about it, and then we wanted people who were connected to open research. So for us, that meant they were networked, they were connected to the community there already. So that helped us to really focus our outreach program. So if you were to do this type of work yourself at this point, then I would also invite you to begin to think about what audiences have the most potential for you. Framing is the third thing. So 3 keys, 3 foundations to an effective outreach program: segmentation, targeting, and now framing. So in conventional marketing, framing is called positioning. And that term makes a lot of sense to me because it's like, how do you want your offering to be positioned in the universe? So if you've got your audience, your person's perspective, how do you want your offering to be positioned in their worldview? So that makes a lot of sense to me, but framing is how it's referred to in social marketing. So the framing statement is a tough piece of work, actually. And at this point, I want to differentiate, don't I, Stephanie, from the case framing. So RDA working groups often have to put together framing statements to make their case to the board to take projects forward. This is totally different. This is a component of your marketing strategy or your outreach program. So a different thing. So the framing statement sets out what you have to offer, why your audience values what you have to offer, not why you think they should value it, but why they value it, and why they will choose what you have to offer over another option. So I'm going to talk about competition in a minute, but remember that a form of competition is a substitute. Or there's another word I'm thinking, so or lack of action, right? So if we want people to deposit software, an alternative is to not deposit software. We want them to deposit on GitHub, and we may have to compete with another repository. That's competition, but of course, a substitute may be to not do it at all. So bear that in mind as I use the term competition in the next couple slides. So this part is essential to present your offering in a way the audience knows that your offering is going to address their needs. So this is an exercise in putting yourself in their shoes. So I go back to the template again and again. I do not find this easy at all, but I can't emphasize enough how useful it is as a launch pad for your outreach program, because it brings together all of the essential ingredients for you. So the statement, describes for the specific audience that you've targeted, the specific offering, the why your offering is different from the other choices, the context, and then a little push over the line, reason to believe. So let's do a couple of examples. So cast your mind back to 2001 when Amazon.com was just a bookseller. So for World Wide Web users who enjoy books, so that's the audience they've chosen. There are people who are online and there are people who enjoy books. Amazon.com is a retail bookseller that provides instant access to over 1.1 million books. So that is the thing that they have to offer. And then they go ahead and make clear the differentiation, saying unlike traditional book retailers, Amazon.com provides a combination of blah, blah, blah. I'm sure we don't need an Amazon ad. So it's bringing it all together in a pretty compelling thing. But let me emphasize now too, this is not copy. This is not meant to go on the side of a billboard. It's not meant to go on your brochures or anything. This is an internal thing, an internal device to help you to construct your program. So let me do a couple of other examples. So again, going back to the foundation of the eLife journal, and we were prioritizing stem cell biologists. So we said for stem cell biologists who are looking to publish their best work, eLife is an open access journal. So that's our point of differentiation at the time. It was that ensures colleagues in every corner of the world can access and build on your work. Unlike other high profile journals, eLife promises high quality, focused decisions that mean less time in revision and publishing faster. So if there are any other prominent biology publishers on the line, let me say that this is not canonized. This is not formally done at eLife at the time, but just in retrospect, I've built it for this discussion because it pretty much captures the work that we did at the time. For Force 11 in Montreal, so we were targeting Montreal-based open research advocates. For them, the Force 11 meeting was a rare convening of all important stakeholders, including all of the lovely people we work with. Unlike other meetings, Force 11 creates opportunities to co-create and co-develop solutions for the future of research communication. Always happy to do an ad for Force 11. So you can see, how we're bringing together these components of your target audience, your offering, and why you're different, and then pushing them over the line. So it's really not easy to do. In my experience, I've struggled with it. But it's really just super useful in building the rest of the program. So on the topic of how hard this is for me, I found a couple of things useful to build the framing statement. So one of those things is a situation analysis. So this is not formal. There are situation analyses approaches in lots of different forms. But before taking on your framing statement, you may want to pause and come to grips with your competition or alternatives. If you're asking folks to engage with any of your project outcomes, really, what is their alternative for them? What's the alternative to them to listening to you? So just understanding what's competing for their attention. Then what differentiates what you have to offer from the other things that compete for their attention. And what do they value about what's on offer? So if you've got something that you want them to engage with, I'm sorry, I hesitate because I don't want to keep referring to open data or software deposit and software citation. So think about your own project and your own work, and then ask yourself, what is it that your audience will value about what you've got? What type of need of theirs does your work help them to address? And the final thing is how do they see us now? So if I would like them to see eLife as a quality journal, let's just say quality, and they don't think that eLife is a quality journal, then there's a delta there that I need to overcome before I can even convince them to engage with my original value proposition. Another thing I find really useful, I'm not sure why I used the red car here. It made sense at some point, but what I find really useful is breaking down features and benefits. So features in this context are things that we think make our widget really shiny and appealing to our audience, but then stopping to think about the benefits really is another exercise in putting ourselves in their shoes and saying, how does it benefit them? We think the car is great because it's really shiny and red, but how does that appeal and help our target audience? And do we have our target audience selected appropriately for this particular offering? So just invoking my days at Health Canada again, I will never forget Jim saying to me, in my 20s, we were looking at this ad on one of those big box TVs on top of a stand that we wheeled into the office. And he showed us an ad that they were piloting for TV before it went to market. And he asked us interns to watch it and then said, what do we think? What do you think? And so we gave him speeches about what we thought. He said, I don't want to know what you think. He said, I want to know what the customer thinks. So just a Jimism, just a reminder of how important it is in marketing and thinking about these campaigns, let me restate, thinking about effectively engaging our audiences so that they care about what we have to offer them. It's very, very important to put ourselves in their shoes. So again, that's the foundational part. That, when Stephanie asked me to do this, that was a part I felt that was just the most important part to share with you in 40 minutes or less. So I've done that. And now with a few more minutes, I'll try and give you a little bit more to work with. And the next thing is selecting tactics. So I'm skipping over the part where you've done all of that work and you've decided what you want the goals of your individual outreach program to be. So tactics are the things that we do to reach our audience. So I'm going to give this pretty short shrift, but bear with me. So by tactics, what we're talking about are using the press, using the media to carry our message. Should we organize an op-ed in the New York Times, or should we send a press release to Eureka Alert? Will that help to get us to our audience? That's the question we're asking ourselves. Social media, is our audience on Twitter, or is it not? Influencers, so influencers as a tactic. So YouTube influencers are actually a pretty ready example for this. So if you're trying to bring a new type of makeup to market, if you get one of them to carry it, then that can help you a lot. But in our space, it makes a lot of sense as well, because if you can get a novelist to carry your message, then their influence is going to expand. So they're a very useful tactic to think about. Direct marketing means sending things via post or sending things via email. So neither of these things is super active, or rather not as active as it has been in the past, but can still be really effective if used strategically. Just want to keep in mind your return on investment, because that's tough these days for direct marketing. Events are expansive. You know what I mean by events. There could be a huge conference. You could have an exhibit on the conference. You could sponsor the conference. You could attend the conference. You could host a faculty meeting. You could have a table outside the library and during Open Access Week. These are all types of events. Sales. So I apologize for using the term sales. I haven't been able to come up with a better one, but I'm talking about one-to-one outreach, just building relationships, just reaching out to people and talking to them about stuff. So that's an important tool in your arsenal. Advertising is another one. So advertising can take a lot of different forms. These days, social media advertising can be very effective and targeted and cheap. And depending how you feel about the data there, the search engines offer advertising. These are both things that we call PPC, or pay per click. So those are available and can help you get a lot of numbers and not spend a lot of money. Of course, advertising also takes the form of billboards outside and buses and ads in magazines and ads in society, newsletters, online and in print, etc. So we have done billboards outside the San Diego Convention Center. So don't knock it if you haven't tried it. Some of the things to think about with selecting your tactics include where your audience is. So if they're not on social media, don't spend your time on social media. what tactics are going to help you to have the most impact, what they need to be moved. So in working to build the reputation for eLife, it was my strong feeling that an ad wasn't going to help. We wanted people to trust us with their very best work, so we needed a peer to ask them and to help convince them. So it was really a peer-to-peer strategy rather than advertising. So thinking about what's going to help them to take the leap you're asking them to take. And of course, how big is your budget? So every tactic costs some level of money or resource. So how much have you got to spend? And time. So our objectives may be to populate the repository by sorry, we didn't talk about this, but it's really useful to set objectives, more specific objectives for your outreach campaign. So if I had an overall charge from my provost to fill the repository, then what I'm proposing here is that you would best be served by targeting one domain that is repository friendly, already ready to share their results, and then set a goal to get 1,000 deposits from that community or that department on campus by a specific date. So how much time have we got to work with, and thus what tactics are going to help us to turn over very quickly? So if we've got 6 months to pass a bill in Congress, then we'd need to get that op-ed into the New York Times pretty darn quick and not wait three or 6 months for that to happen. I'm just making that stuff up. I hope it makes sense. So again, this is our full program. A full program would start with organizational goals, move through these different components, and then conclude with assets, collateral, planning, and measuring. So I'm going to say just a little bit more about planning. I'm not going to say anything about assets and collateral because I don't have time, but that's to do with the materials and the websites and things that you need to convey your message to your audience. I won't speak to it, but I'm just going to call out FAIR because FAIR is pretty awesome packaging. So we've taken, an extensive set of ideas, concepts, and a movement to get people to behave a different way and to create systems that meet certain standards. And we've got a very nice acronym, a very nice, memorable acronym that has carried through the community. So that's really nice packaging. You may not think about it that way, but the next time you've got a pretty expansive concept to communicate to your audience, you might think about how could you package it in a way that will be memorable and carry far. So kudos to those people there. So we won't have time to do this, but in case it's useful, I've just put together this little schedule, sample schedule, and I'll share my slides in case you want to play with this a little bit. But if you did all of this work and you came up with a comprehensive outreach plan and you've done all the work on knowing your audience and selecting your tactics, then that might look something like this. So you've got your tactics on the left-hand side, you've got your timetable going across the verticals, and then on the far right, the fifth column, you've got measurements and interventions. So we would optimally like to measure how our tactics are performing if we have time, and then we like to try and improve how they're doing by intervening and just tweaking them a little bit. So lots to say there that we don't have time to do. With this particular campaign, it all hung on the stem cell meeting in May in Boston of that year. So all of the tactics were kind of arranged around that to build a crescendo. So that's me done. I hope that's okay. I hope that's useful and not too much information. Again, if hopefully I've caught your interest and my materials will be something that you care to explore a little bit more in your free time. If there are just 4 things that you take from my presentation today, I would like to propose that they are these. So the first is to really to think carefully about your outreach and to just go ahead and do the work to target specific audiences. It's going to be worth your while. I promise. The people in our community, they're different communities. They speak different languages. And if you speak to them in their language, you're just going to be so much more successful in achieving what it is that you want to achieve. The second thing is to spend time getting to know them. It's actually not that hard. So, I know that a lot of us work with everybody. We work with humanities and social sciences and wet sciences and, everything. So, I know, I'm recommending that you prioritize, and that you'll be more effective if you prioritize. And then once you've got your priorities, get to know those audiences. And if that feels daunting, I would encourage you to talk to them or email them and get to know them, because people like to talk about their perspectives and share what's going on in their world. And it's a fantastic opportunity to get to know how things look like from their perspective. And I think my colleagues in product will agree that once you've had 5 or 6 conversations with people from a specific field, they start to repeat what the others have said. So 5, 6, 7 conversations is often enough to get the lay of the land insofar as you need it for broad purposes that we're talking about here. Third is to speak their language. Present what you have to offer in terms that resonate with them. So take the time to think about what need is it that you're addressing for them. How is this going to be valuable to them? Not what we'd like it to be, which is easily done because we're so passionate. We really want these things to happen, but just take the time to translate to what things look like from their worldview and speak to their needs and their values. And the last thing is to just go ahead and borrow freely from commercial marketing. There are decades and decades of experience there, and so many resources spent to really refine marketing and to do a better job at selling and promoting. So let's take it, let's use it, and let it inspire you. Let it empower you to promote the things that you have to promote for the advancement of research. So I'll stop there. We've got 13 minutes, so that should give us ample time. And I will look forward to hearing what you have to say and all of your questions. So Stephanie, what have we got?
Yeah, thank you so much, Jennifer. I for the audience, I attended her class at the Force 11 Scholarly Communication Institute, and it was a much longer, so I'm really impressed with what you did to crunch it down. But there's certainly a lot more that we took away. In fact, a lot of what we've been doing with marketing these webinars, we use tips that we got from the class that we took. And this
is that
one,
true?
Yeah, and this is
great.
We've had record-breaking attendance, so it's working. Okay, so with that, I will read off. There are some questions in the Q&A, and then I'll have a quick look at chat. So the first one is from Charlie Kalinzi. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Is segmentation something you do at the actual time of presentation, prior to presentation, because you might not have access to all your audience, especially when we facilitate in workshops? Definitely prior, but if you open up chat, you can, or Q&A, you can read the question too, Jen, if you need.
I'd rather listen, if that's okay. I kind of compute better that way. But I'm not sure what we mean by presentation. So are we talking about like we're making a presentation to a faculty meeting or working group meeting?
I'm guessing, unless Charlie, do you want to unmute? Are you still here? And elaborate. Let's see. Charlie, I can allow you to talk. Would you like to do that? I can. Do you want to elaborate on your question, Charlie? Oh, maybe he's not listening.
Don't say that. Well, for the sake of time, I'll say, yeah, it's tough, So what I've presented today is really talking about things that we have some time for, right? Like we know that the outcome from our project is approaching. We know we're going to have to begin to do our outreach campaign. So begin to plan it in advance. So that this work is part of your planning process. So I'd say you need some weeks, if not months, to really pull it together properly. But at the same time, if you don't have that time, knowledge of your audience before you enter the room is is really, really useful. So at least knowing who you got to deal with is pretty important. That can really help you. And then whatever you can learn about their perspectives can also really, really be useful. So, and sometimes we can draw conclusions about, or let me restate, we can guess at where someone might be coming from based on their disciplinary affiliation, right? So with open data, ecology is way out there. So if you're talking about open data, you might speak to them in one way as opposed to another discipline. Or in the past, chemistry has been pretty slow to open access. So you might adapt your presentation to reflect those things. So whatever you know about your audience in advance, it will help.
Thanks, Jennifer. Okay, so the next question is from Danny Kincaid. How does one know if their assumptions about their target audience are valid? Is there any ground truthing? Yeah,
I definitely want to check assumptions. So but build on prior experience as well. So if you're not confident about your assumptions, if you didn't develop them yourself, or you didn't get them from trusted colleagues. I mean, I've only worked in small organizations, so I've not worked with organizations that have big databases on this type of thing. But if you're not confident about your assumptions, I would just go ahead and check them. Talk to members of the audience to find out. But there's also a lot of knowledge in our community, a lot of knowledge. I mean, even within eLife in 10 years, we, as a new team, we accumulated a lot. So, anyone who wanted to understand kind of the browsing habits online of cell biology, they just needed to go and ask Giuliano. So speaking to colleagues is another way to check assumptions.
Okay, so the next question is from Bairu Zhao. I'm probably butchering people's names, and my apologies. This is really interesting. Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm just wondering how we could use this framework tactic to get the attention of institutional leadership.
That is, I'm just putting my documents in the chat so I don't forget. Yeah, I mean, that I think, sorry, institutional leadership are so important, right? So I think that that this is a really useful framework. So the framework is, okay, you've prioritized your institutional leadership, which I think is one segment, as opposed to, faculty, students, etc. So institutional leadership is part of your segment. But then what other facets of them are useful for you to know? So in academia, understanding the discipline they come from, I think, is also very useful. So further segmenting your institutional leadership into their domains. Where do they come from? Their seniority as well. People who are more senior may have ingrained views that are different from people who are less senior. So understanding segmenting even institutional leadership in a little bit more refined way, I think, could be really useful. And then the next part of the framework is, of course, after the framing statement. We won't talk about that, it's stressful, but talking about the tactics, using that information to choose tactics that are going to resonate with them. So, leaders work in leader circles. So is it going to work to put an ad on Twitter? Probably not. Is it going to work to ask an influencer on campus to send an email to them? Probably yes. So spending some time to understand what else about the institutional leader is useful for you to know, I think will really powerfully inform the strategies you use to engage them.
Thanks. Okay, so the next one is Una Mannix. This was fantastic. Thank you very much. You mentioned that direct marketing, i.e. email, has low return on investment. Can you give some more information here?
Yeah, so I'm in the UK now, and the UK was recently in Europe. So global data protection regulation, is that what GDPR stands for? So GDPR has changed the dynamics of email and has meant that we are able to email a lot less people. people. So people who had databases of emails before have had those databases halved, and then asking people to subscribe is a different challenge, at least for my experience. So in your community, your geography and what you have to offer may be very different, but I found that people have engaged with email a little bit less. The alternative to using native kind of organic or home-built databases of contacts is to buy a list, and that's really expensive and pretty low on return based on what I've been working with. So it's something worth taking a look at. And if you do take a look at email, just see what other people have done and see what their ROI has been. So there are reportable clicks and opens associated with email campaigns. So I would encourage you to try and learn what you can from others before doing that.
Thank you. We have quite a few more.
What's okay, that? Sorry. I was going to elaborate because it's a little bit different when you're working within one institution, but I'll stop talking.
We actually have quite a few more. So one thing I will say is that if we don't get to all of the questions, I will put them on a spreadsheet and have Jennifer answer them, and then I'll send them to all of you. So, okay, so the next one is, first of all, there is someone down at the bottom that asked in planning part, what does FAIR stand for? And if someone could answer that in chat, that would be really helpful for me. Maybe I'll just gonna put it out to you, so someone to please help answer FAIR acronym, and then you can link to the webpage on the Force 11 website. Okay, Matthew Cannon asks, I'd like to hear Jen's thoughts on accelerating cultural change. This is a lot of the challenge around open ideas.
Yeah, hi, Matt. I mean, I think Brian's framework, the Brian Nozick framework from Center for Open Science, is a really good pathway. So, there's so many aspects of that, making change possible, and then making it easy, and then making it normative, and then, incentivizing it. So, so incentivizing is higher on the pyramid, because if people are rewarded for publishing in certain journals or sharing their data and sharing their protocols, then that helps the wheel to turn in a way. But my opinion is that if we use these strategies to effectively connect with our communities, to get them to engage more widely and deeply with the infrastructure, and with the processes and with the communities, and that'll go a long way to helping us to change the cultures. So yeah, I'll leave it there. I could get into more cultural stuff, but I look forward to talking to you again, Matt.
Okay, next is Solius. I'm not even going to try the last name, sorry. Averse reaction to marketing can be caused not only in consumer markets, but in scientific communities as well. When people feel that you are applying marketing methods, they go defensive. How to not make this mistake and not to lose your audience?
Yeah, well, don't do what I did. Don't talk about marketing. Don't talk about sales. So yeah, so we just need to be very respectful of that skepticism. So it was unavoidable for me to I couldn't have avoided talking about marketing and sales in this presentation today, but I think that it's important to respect that skepticism and use other terms. Talk about outreach. Talk about engagement. Talk about priorities. So whether or not we agree that skepticism is very real, and I think we need not worry about it. Let's just use different terms and go on and do our jobs. We don't need to worry about semantics. We do need to worry about tone, though, because the academic community, the worldwide research community, operates with a certain culture insofar as we have a global culture, and we want to respect that as well.
Okay, we have time for one more. I'll just quickly say there's a couple of comments. Thanks for the very interesting talk. What you say makes a lot of sense in academia as well. And then thank you for the inspiring talk. Would you elaborate on widely and deeply at the same time? But I think we'll get to that. Jen and I were actually talking about perhaps doing a series on this topic in 2022. So I think I'll poll this audience and see if you think that would be a good idea, because there's so much more we could be doing. It's 9 now, so we've got one more, Jen, and perhaps we could just put it into writing, but I'll go ahead and read it to the crowd. As a research establishment, we don't have funding for billboards and other marketing materials. The only thing we have is email. We just don't seem to have the success with this method. We've tried social media, but unless they know about us, it's difficult to get researchers. I'm assuming we have to go back through segmentation and tailor a smaller group rather than 7,000 staff. The answer to that is yes. And I think we could touch more on that, Jen, later. I want to thank you, Jen. We're a little bit over time now. Really appreciate you doing this for us. And thank everyone for attending. We do have plenary 18 coming up, and I'll just go through real quick, and everybody's jumping off. Sorry. Anyway, we have plenary 18 coming up in a couple of weeks, and that's November 3rd through the 11th. There is a pre-webinar about all things RDA. If you want to join that, you can find that on our website. Here are a whole bunch of links for you. And if you haven't joined our RDA, we really think that you ought to. It's a great, vibrant community. And Jen, again, thank you so much. And I will send a poll out to all of you and get your opinion on whether you think we should expand on this topic. With that, we're going to end up saying goodbye.
Thank you.